Yeah.
It's time.
Oh, hi.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's episode of The View. Tonight, our guests are
Megan Pig.
Kristen McLeod, Joyce Celine,
and I am your host, Ariana Delatorre. Today, we would typically be discussing augmentative and alternative communication as such. Instead, we will be discussing our new book that will be coming out with called Understanding Stuttering's Emotional Landscape, Lessons from the King's Speech, a film that we all recently watched this past week.
excellent.
So today I thought it would be a good idea for us to discuss some emotions, feelings, and attitudes about how Bertie, or King George, felt throughout his lifespan, throughout the movie, throughout his reign as a person who stutters.
Yeah. And I think, we really have to think about Bertie versus King George. So Bertie, the man, just in a normal society, but then also kind of the different pressures that there are as King George, or even just being a member of the royal family, with just kind of in everything that you do, even as a young child, you're supposed to conduct yourself in a certain way, you're supposed to speak in a certain way and with a certain manner and certain propriety. So I think, maybe that has a factor in how it impacted his stutter or stammer, as they called it.
Yes, I know one of the scenes that stood out that was very emotional for me was when King George heard himself on the record when he was speaking, reading, when he listened to something on his headphones.
That was great.
And then he didn't want to hear it, and then he went home and took some time and then listened to it, and it was just so emotional. He was so proud of himself. He's never heard himself without a stutter before.
Shake it off with that's true. Joyce.
Yes. Do you remember the scene where Lionel finally was able to break down those emotional walls that Bertie had from his childhood, and how he was able to express all of the hard times that he had to go through, and how it really affected his life, and how his stutter was manifested, and how he was really just ashamed of himself and ashamed of who he was, and he wasn't able to express himself fully because of the stutter. It just really brought him down a lot.
Yeah, because it was such a taboo subject. And finally, that scene where Lionel Logue was sitting with him in Westminster Abbey, and he was trying to pull out some emotions from Bertie, and Bertie finally said, "Because I have a voice." So he knows that he is meant to be heard, even though he has a stutter. He still has his voice. He still needs the people to hear what he has to say. As far as that goes with Lionel Logue, you see that almost counseling piece between the two of them. Whereas with the other members, the other speech therapists that Bertie had seen, they were telling him to smoke, to relax his larynx, to have him speaking with marbles in his mouth. It was all very mechanical, like Kristen is saying. But instead you see Bertie and Lionel have more of a counseling aspect with that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what made a bigger impact on Bertie as not just a man, but as a king, as someone who was meant to be great and was kind of held back by his perception of himself as someone who stammers.
He needed to be able to trust someone, to trust himself, that he could speak without a stutter, and the other therapists didn't have that relationship that Bertie had with him.
Very true.
Yeah.
And I know, Joy, you had mentioned someone who is an inspiration, and maybe Bertie didn't see himself as an inspiration because he was a person who had a stutter. But you were watching a 60-minute segment, and there was a producer who actually was inspired by King George.
Yes. So actually, the producer of the film grew up during the time of King George, and he himself had a stutter as well from his childhood.
No way.
His parents advised him to listen to the king's speeches, and he was inspired by how well the king was able to overcome his struggle. And by the age of 16, his stutter went away.
Wow.
Very inspirational.
It's like a light or a switch had flipped or something. Interesting.
So I think that brings us now into where time was then and where time is now as far as our field goes, and where treatment has come since then, and some clinical implications, whereas you only heard about some people who actually came out into the public light with they're stubborn, wanted to get help, whereas now it's more of, or less of a taboo subject, and you're seeing more people seek treatment in all the different treatment approaches we have. Which is really
Still using that counseling piece inside
Exactly.
treatment, and gaining that relationship with the client.
Yeah, and I think something that stood out to me was, as vulnerable as we're asking our clients to be, it requires a vulnerability on the clinician's part as well. I mean, like that scene when Birdie was calling Lionel like a son of a no good, brewer or something. I mean, you could tell he was very hurt.
Yes,
and
yes.
so, but I think it's kind of that's the price of vulnerability. The risk of kind of hurting each other and unpacking these emotions. You're probably going to see something,
to make each other grow.
Yes.
exactly.
But
Great.
all in all, I thought it was a great ending.
Great
I hope
movie.
our book will be a New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
But thank you, ladies, for being here today.
Thank you guys.
Cheers.
And this has been The View. Just this
It
now.
just picks up sound. But okay.
Hello. Welcome to The View.
Joy.
So, thank you for joining us today.
Wow, the camera adds 10 pounds.
I know, my arms look horrible. I need to find
Meanwhile, I'm gonna be like, arms up.
Does my bum?
Am I starting now? Start whenever you're ready and begin with a beginning.
Hello and welcome to The View.
I thought you were going to introduce myself. Oh,
He didn't think it was possible. Macarius! Macarius!
Oh, it is. Why did it go?
Oh,
It's still going.
I mean, it's still recording.
Yeah.
Commercial break. Let me touch it. It'll make that.
Right? Makeup!
That's what we do with